It's not marriage. Again, there is gender matters. There is a difference between male and female. The two coming together are different than two men or two women. Those are just facts. And again, I have to ask the question, since we've had same-sex attraction, same-sex relations throughout history, how come it didn't dawn on people to redefine marriage through those centuries? The idea about gay being the new black, by the way, is not original with me. That was the front cover of Advocate, the most influential gay publication in America, asking that question a few years ago. It comes up constantly that this is the new civil rights issue. I like these comments from gay journalist Charles Weinkoff. Newsflash, blacks in America didn't start out as hip-hop fashion designers. They were slaves. There's a big difference between being able to enjoy a civil union with the same-sex partner of your choice and not being able to drink out of a water fountain, eat at a lunch counter, or use a restroom because you don't have the right skin color. Let's take this further. Aside from the fact that we've emphasized the government has no reason and no obligation to sanction every romantic relationship, to give it its blessing. The fact of the matter is you must ask about these other relationships. In point of fact, Dr. Smaw, there are people in Germany, there are people in America that are now arguing based on same-sex marriage being legalized, laws being passed. They are now shouting, wonderful, so I can marry my sister. Wonderful, so I can marry my daughter. We have to ask. You don't just open up the dam and let the flood come without asking about the consequences. We must ask these other questions. Otherwise, because these things are presently in the courts. Do we not have the foresight to address them in advance? If we're talking about sexual orientation in any way being compared to skin color or a civil right, then that would presuppose that sexual orientation is innate and immutable, neither of which are true. For example, John D'Amelio, well-known gay activist, professor of history and gender and women's studies at the University of Illinois, said this: born gay is an idea with a large constituency, LGBT and otherwise. It's an idea designed to allay the ingrained fears of a homophobic society and the internalized fears of gays, lesbians, and bisexuals. What's most amazing to me, this is a gay activist speaking, about the born gay phenomenon is that the scientific evidence for it is thin as a reed. Yet it doesn't matter. It's an idea with such social utility that one doesn't need much evidence in order to make it attractive and credible. Lesbian author Camille Paglia said this in her book Vamps and Tramps: no one is born gay. The idea is ridiculous. The reason researchers are still looking for a gay gene or looking for some evidence, biological, genetic, that can explain the origins of homosexuality is because it hasn't been found yet. So it is not innate. In fact, I can go around this room and identify every person of color. That's easy to do. I can't identify who's gay, who's lesbian, simply by who's sitting here and outward appearance. We don't know that unless it's identified. So again, the comparison breaks down completely. Let's take this further. I believe your stories. Some of you here, when you tell me that you were in some ex-gay program and you didn't change, that you were tormented, that you were suicidal, and you didn't change, I believe you. I want you to believe the stories of friends of mine, of my late brother-in-law, of others who say they did change. Lisa Diamond, a sex researcher, wrote a book, Sexual Fluidity, about the fluidity of sexual desires in some women. That they can be heterosexual all their lives and then suddenly there's a shift of some kind. Or it can shift back the other way. One of the women said something that others have quoted: I don't fall in love with a gender but with a person. So skin color is innate and immutable. The late Michael Jackson notwithstanding, it cannot be changed. And yet sexual orientation with many is fluid. So we are now going to redefine marriage, open up the possibilities of all new definitions of marriage, which again are presently being fought for. We cannot argue with them. The secular media is even saying this is the next revolution. You've got the HBO shows, Big Love and all this. It's everywhere. You can't get away from these realities. Either we hold to marriage for its purpose. I'm not even saying God ordained, although that's what I believe as a follower of Jesus, but its purpose in society. Either we hold to that, or you're going to have to open up marriage equality to all kinds of equations that you never planned on. A few more comments. We're not talking here about American history, slavery, oppression of women, segregation. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the only thing known to the entire human race through history. We're talking about something without which ultimately, male-female unions, none of us would be here. We're talking about guaranteeing that a child will either have no mother or no father. Guaranteeing that a child will be separated from father or mother for the rest of their lives. Are we thinking about the child, or are we thinking about ourselves when we do that? And if marriage does not have in mind the next generation, we're missing something very profound. Ask yourself who you're fighting for in this equation. Not only so, but when we talk about freedoms, equality, I have never in my entire life run into such extraordinary intolerance, bigotry, hatred. The moment I simply say, you know, I believe a man's designed for a woman and a woman for a man, and I don't support same-sex marriage. I have been branded Hitler as a Jew. I'm a Jewish follower of Jesus, so as a Jew, it's kind of unique to be branded Hitler. I've been called Hitler, jihadist. I can show you, the online clips where people talk in detail about the physical things they want to do to hurt and attack me, just because I say, I think it's best that we recognize gender and recognize there's a role for men, role for women. I'm not mad at these people. This will give me some persecution complex. They're probably just thinking I'm threatening them. But the hatred, the intolerance that comes our way is mind-boggling. And the fact that there was a bit of a furor even to discuss this on campus as if it was too volatile. What will happen? Tell me what will happen to religious rights and freedoms. What will happen if same-sex marriage becomes the law of the land and people say, well, we don't recognize that. We have an issue with that. They will now be looked at the exact same way people are looked at that oppose interracial marriage in the past. We will be codified by the law as bigots. And already in school systems in America, there are parents who said, like in Massachusetts, when these things are taught in school, homosexuality, these other things taught in school, we want to pull our first grader out, our kindergartner out. The school said no, because it's legal in our state. And the Court of Appeals held it up and said it is more important in the schools to teach, quote, diversity than to honor the request of the children. There are major corporations that give mega bucks, massive amounts of money, $500,000 at a shot to gay rights organizations, and they have every right to do that. What they do with their money, who they support, that's their prerogative. You have Chick-fil-A gives a small donation to one organization that stands against same-sex marriage. There are campuses in America now trying to get them banned. Incredible intolerance. And this is while most of America, in terms of states that have voted, are still saying we uphold historic marriage. So I still await from my esteemed colleague some answer as to what the meaning of marriage is and why it should be redefined, why the government has any interest in sanctioning the romantic and sexual relations that its private citizens have, unless it is marriage. I'd love to hear, is there a difference between male and female, or the genders just blurred? Do they matter? I would love to hear if you can hold to marriage as a union of a man and woman without being branded an intolerant bigot. I'm quite sure my esteemed colleague would never say those words of me or others in this position, but I would love to hear that publicly renounced, because it makes dialogue all but impossible. With that, I await with interest Dr. Smaw's comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown, and reintroducing Dr. Eric Smaw for a response.
It's getting quite hot in here. Dr. Brown is letting out a lot of hot air. So I will respond to some of the things that he said in his preliminary remarks about me. First he said, I gave him a rebuttal. And then he said, I didn't rebut him at the end of his speech. Dr. Brown, I will point that out to you as a contradiction. There's a little logic for you. And I'll continue, since I'm in my rebuttal stage, showing you the logical flaws in his arguments. I'll answer some of the questions that he asked. He wanted to know whether or not gender matters. I'll talk about whether or not gender matters. He said that I didn't really respond to his history lesson. This wasn't about history. He didn't really give a history lesson. Okay, so I'll respond to your history lesson even if you don't want to acknowledge it as a history lesson. And then he said people called him names in the past. Dr. Brown, you will note that none of the times that we interacted have I ever called you a name. So I don't pretend to speak for those people who called him names. Of course people would have called him names. People have called me names. In fact, I published in the Orlando Sentinel on this very issue. I got a flood of emails from people on the opposite side of this issue, many of whom called me names. In fact, one person said,